the show with your friend and mine. So tell me, Dr. Squee, who's it gonna be this time? We like to hear you talk, but we love to hear you listen. And if you are not subscribed, you won't know what you're missing. So welcome to the Dr. Squee Show. Welcome to the Dr. Squee Show. Welcome to the Dr. Squee Show. Headphones up. Here we go.
Hello and welcome to the Dr. Squee Show presents the Lynch Hour. So this is the new title we're going to use for all our kind of Lynch movie reviews. So we started off last time with Razorhead and Help Me Out.
Elephant Man.
Elephant Man. Of course, Elephant Man, the one I've seen the most. Fucking, so of course I forget it. Anyway, so now we're powering on. We'll get it in a second. Though. I'm Dr. Squee. Joining me as always for the Lynch Hour is...
Jim King.
Jim, thanks for joining me again. So what are we talking about this week?
We are talking about Lynch's next two films, which I think this is a... I know we said this last week, and we'll probably say it next time. But I think this is a really good contrast because we've got Lynch's most sort of studio, straight-up blockbuster. I mean, it didn't bust blocks as it happened. It didn't do too well, but it was certainly intended to do so in the form of
my blocks. I tell you,
in the form of his adaptation of Frank Herbert's Dune, which obviously we've just had Denis Villeneuve's take on it recently. So I'm sure we'll talk about differences, similarities, and so on. But then we've got... I think this is the point at which Lynch sort of reaches his final form. I think if there is such a thing as quintessential Lynch, then Blue Velvet is that film. And that's what we're looking at second.
Just 1 second while I make a note. Jim's intros to the movies, new part of the Lynch Hour. That's happening. That saves me so much work, and you did it really well. It's great. That's good. No, sorry, that sounded patronizing, but I genuinely mean it.
No, that's a boy. I'll get a pat on the head.
Yeah, I like a pat on the head myself. I don't know. But yeah, it sort of did remind me weirdly of last week because it's like, yeah, like you say, it's like, but some things were switched. So like the first one, what did feel... I don't know. It's almost like that one challenged me more, whereas like the other one's more challenging in its themes, but it's more of a kind of like it's standard movie, which is on the Lynch scale. You know, it's more of his kind of like real worldly stuff, and the other one is so otherworldly. And weirdly, it's swapped around though, because last week the kind of otherworldly one was the lesser. I mean, okay, it's a cult classic because of Lynch, but it's not, you know, in the mainstream in the way that Elephant Man is. But the kind of like the weirder otherworldly one is the better, probably the better celebrated out of the two, even though Blue Velvet is very renowned as well amongst Lynch fans. Yeah, so we'll dive straight into the Dune of it all. I'm just going to talk a little bit about my personal like history with Dune very quickly. So when I was growing up, my brothers always had it on, and I found it sort of like quite off-putting. Like it was the fact that they kind of were so into it, I think, put me off a little bit. But also it's like films like that and Star Wars, even though I would come to appreciate Star Wars so much as an adult, I went more for your Star Trek and more your kind of warmer, inviting films when I was younger. I wanted that kind of sort of security blanket, I guess. You know, it's like I'm talking much about it, but I was bullied as a kid. I felt a bit outcast. So they kind of gave me that kind of a sense of family and kind of familiarity amongst friends and all that. Whereas like I'm glad I waited this long basically to watch this version of Dune. You and I talked when they had the Denis Villeneuve, or however you pronounce it. I'm just going to pronounce it like that, version out, and we kind of both agreed that we were watching that version first and then going back to the classic. I was kind of tempted by the original. It was you kind of like, it was literally that conversation which stopped me watching the original first. So glad I did in that order. First of all, I think you watch the Villeneuve one, given the option now, first, because it's sort of like more traditionally to the book as an adaptation, even though he's made his choices. Yeah, he does. And then you kind of get to watch the Lynch one, and you can see where he's kind of like put the Lynch mark on it, and you probably would be able to tell anyway, but it's kind of, I found it more fun doing this way because I'd watched a sort
Yeah.
of more straight telling of it, for want of a better phrase.
Yeah, I mean, there were lots of reasons I sort of did it. I was much like you, Dune. This film version just kind of passed me by. Like it wasn't big in pop culture in the way that Star Wars is, even though am and was a big sci-fi fan. So I just kind of missed it. And then when I got into David Lynch, I read little bits about this saying, well, David Lynch has kind of disowned it, and it's not, doesn't really fit with his filmography. And I just thought, well, I'm not that interested in it. And similarly, I'd never read the book of Dune until last year. I actually read it. And I waited to read the book until I'd seen both of the new films, and I waited to watch this until I'd seen both the new films because I'd heard that this adapts the whole book, and I didn't want the ending spoiled of the second film.
Yeah.
Okay. Turns out I didn't need to worry too much because they great liberty with the ending of this film. That feels like kind of a studio mandate, like we need a proper ending. And people talked for years about Dune the book not being a book that you could adapt to screen. And quite often when they say that, it's because it's so fantastical or it'd be so expensive or whatever it is. But I think the reason is because it's an oddly structured book. Well, it's oddly structured. It would make for an oddly structured film is probably the better way to say it, because books can be much freer with their structure. And I think that's why it was kind of regarded as unfilmable. And I think you see evidence of that in this version. And I think Denis Villeneuve reached probably the best compromise you can do, which was splitting it in two. But even then, I think it does have some structural issues. But we'll cover that when we do the Villeneuve hour. We'll
Yeah, I
talk
mean,
which one this time.
yeah, I mean, I must talk to see if Kevin Anderson would do another interview with me. I've been lucky enough to interview him. Matching. Hey.
There we go. Yeah.
I think it's even the same, like it's squash.
Not that we're shilling for Fantasy Forest at all, but they make very good plastic cups.
They don't need our help. Sold out in like they are literally sold out in minutes. Other events claim it. They do it. I mean, I don't know which events, but I'm sure there's some. But anyway, we will never mind that now. Yeah, so I got an interview. Funnily enough, actually, another event, Sci-Fi Weekender. I got to interview Kevin Anderson, and he's sort of the heir apparent of the Dune books. So he kind of co-wrote some of them with sorry.
With Brian Herbert, he's written more Dune books than Frank Herbert did. He's written, I think they're up to about 21 or something now.
Yeah, it's amazing. Hello, Razorhead in the house. Thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, excellent.
Always. We can't start without Razorhead. We were just bluffing into
no, of course.
But yeah, it'd be great to see if he'd do an episode just talking about like the movie versions, but I digress. Yeah, I must admit, one thing I have got, and we'll go into the film in just a second, but it's like I really have decided after watching the 8 hours, I think it was, of the Villeneuve version, and then the kind of more trimmed 2.5 is, I think, of this one, and I think Villeneuve is about 5 hours, is it? All told,
about 5, yeah.
Yeah, so we got 2.5 and 5 hour versions. I will say the new version stunning. We don't want to go too much into that because we're not talking about the version. But yeah, Lynch's version very interesting, and I kind of love it. I feel like I might revisit this just to see his kind of weird and wonderful. But the story of Dune, honestly, may not be for me. I find it kind of fascinating. I see why people get it. It's just too beard strokey. There's something about it just doesn't. Like I again, I can appreciate it. I think it's kind of objectively a great story. It just doesn't tickle my pickle, as they say. I don't know. How are you on the story of Dune in general? Just
I really like it. I find it really interesting. I like worlds that are created where you feel like there's a broader world to it. Like, sort of
Yeah.
elaborate on that. Like, there's some things that you watch it and it doesn't feel like there's a universe beyond that hour and a half that you're watching, or that 200-page book, or whatever it might be. Whereas things like Lord of the Rings, like Star Wars, you feel like, oh, I'm just seeing a little window of a much broader universe. There's something bigger out there. And that's what I really like about Dune, is that it feels like there's a lot more to discover in that world. How much of that I'm going to enjoy, I don't know. The recent Dune Prophecy TV show was not great.
Not sure.
But yeah, don't bother. I'm gonna read some more of the books, I think, and I know there's another film coming out, but yeah, I find it an interesting story and an interesting world, and I think that's also one of the reasons it's sort of difficult to adapt, because the character of Paul Atreides in this one, played by our friend, I say our friend, but David Lynch's friend, Kyle MacLachlan.
Yeah, yeah.
We've covered him on this show
Which, by the
before,
way,
and we're going to talk about him again. But
it's so fun to see him over the movies, kind of slowly become Coop, basically, like in appearance.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
by Blue Velvet, you're kind of going, oh, he looks a bit Coop, bit more Coop like. He looks like an older kid playing a younger kid in June, and then he looks a bit on his way to being Coop
yeah.
after. I like
But
that.
but yeah, I think that character, it appears like he's going to be the clean cut hero, like in your Luke Skywalker mold. And I think he becomes something much more complex than that. The book certainly starts to delve into, and I've only read the first book, so I can't speak to the sequels. But the book starts to delve into that, and I think the more recent films start to delve into that. Whereas I feel this film doesn't really. This almost feels like the studio were going, oh well, Star Wars has done really well. Let's get the rights to this Dune thing. But it's much more complex than that, and the good guy's not really good. Doesn't matter. I want a space opera. Go make it, David Lynch. Why do we hire David Lynch? I don't know. Let's just get that guy. It's all
I
crazy.
mean, I think that was their masterstroke, quite frankly. I mean, it's like, I think maybe actually you might have talked me into listening to the audio of the Dune. Like maybe the full story might give me, I don't know. It's like, but again, I think the reason why I like these films, even though the story may not be necessarily for me, it's just those auteurs, and we're going to talk about one of them, but quickly, just to raise ahead, Prophecy was horrible.
It was.
So boring, unpredictable. So maybe I mean, need to get deeper in the world, but yeah, let's start with this film.
To be fair, the whole point of prophecies is that they're predictable. That's kind of their thing. But sorry, I'll say my words rather than play with them. I apologize.
It's okay, it's all good. So straight off the bat, I mean, I think the first thing was I kind of like because it's hard to not do any comparison when you saw the other film first, but it's like I think maybe Timothée Chalamet was more kind of the look of I haven't read the book, so it's harder to, but it's like from watching both of them, I get the feeling he's more kind of the age they're going for, and he's got kind of a younger face somehow. I feel like the thing about Kyle MacLachlan, which makes him such an interesting and wonderful actor, is I think he was born looking older. Like he was born looking like he probably is the right age for all I know, but he just looks like he's 40. Like at all times, there's something about his face which is so characterful, so kind of like drawn in a way that younger faces usually aren't. I found that really interesting.
Yeah. I'm not sure. We'll have to look up who was actually younger when they filmed it, but I think. And also, I'm not to decry Kyle MacLachlan. I think he's brilliant, but I think that at this stage in his career, compared to where Timothée Chalamet is now, I think Chalamet's probably a bit more of an accomplished actor and a bit more of a nuanced actor. Not to say that Kyle MacLachlan isn't or doesn't become so, but I think as a performance, I think Timothée Chalamet is probably better, but I think he was also probably helped by a better script in that one. But yeah, like the cast overall, I think is fascinating on this. Like we've got Patrick Stewart turning up, which is fantastic.
Can I just quickly, sorry, because I know you're going to wrap through all the cast, and I just want to highlight one scene quick.
Go on.
It's the scene. This is the like. I don't know. I'm trying to do it in a slightly family friendly way, but like this is the finishing shot for me. It was when you got him on the screen. You've got Kyle MacLachlan, and you've got oh my god, who am I not thinking of? Like in the scene where they're kind of talking about their it's when they do the training at the beginning, and it's him and
Dean Stockwell.
And it's like you've got the three of them there. Oh my god. I mean, I'm sort of glad that they didn't get him doing whiteface like they do in the other film in this one. But no, there was a slight kind of like, I must admit, it is the probably most subtle and least jarring kind of Asian. It looked like they were trying to Asian up Dean Stockwell, which I think by his name.
Yeah, maybe a little bit. I
looked at the name and it seemed like he was meant to be Asian, and then there was just little kind of effects.
It's Dr. Yue. I don't think it's specifically said in the book that he's of Asian descent. I mean, I don't. Well, in the Dune universe, there isn't such a thing anymore. They all come from different planets and blah blah blah. But yes, I think we were walking a line there. I think certainly the name Dr. Yue is Asian coded, and putting that makeup on possibly questionable. But yeah,
those three on the screen. Where'd you get that? Where'd you get those three together? Just like what?
Yeah, it's great, and like as I say, some of the cast, like Max von Sydow pops up, and like Sting as the main villain. Like, what a bizarre bit of casting. I don't think he's bad in the role, but it's just a very abstract bit of casting there.
Is it just me, or is he not, like, for a main villain? I'm not saying he's got no screen time, but he seems light on screen time for the main villain. Or was that just me?
Again, though, I think this is like a structural problem with adapting the book, and I think they traversed it a bit better in the more recent films, because that character doesn't get introduced until later on in the book, and so they can't bring him in until later on in the film. And so he doesn't get a lot of time really to build it up. I suppose the main villain really is Baron Harkonnen, but he's this big overweight guy who isn't physically a threat to anyone, so they have to have a guy who can fight for him. So we've got to introduce this guy, and they don't really have time to do it. Whereas in the new films, you get a bit where he's introduced on that cool black and white planet, and he's very much built up as the villain of the second film. So again, I think that's a problem with trying to cram so much in. Like, and I'm sorry I do keep referring to the other films, but what I found really interesting is when you look at it structurally, like the first sort of hour and a half of this film roughly equates to the first new film, and then the last 45 minutes of this film equate to the second film, which to me implies that we're rushing that second part of the story. But that's because they're trying to fit in a story that doesn't fit into a 3-act structure, but they're trying to impose that because that's what Hollywood blockbusters needed, or to a large extent probably still need to look like. So, I think there's all sorts of problems with that.
Sorry, man. I was just going to get back to the cast very quickly. So raise heads, but Jürgen Punchnow is great too. Is he the Baron?
He was his dad. He was
right,
the Duke.
So him as a Duke, yeah. And of course we got Nance. Sorry, what's his first name?
Jack Nance.
Jack Nance. Sorry, of course. Jack Nance, as ever in a Lynch film. I'm really. That's kind of like one of my one of my favorite things. It's the fact that Lynch's first film was kind of like he was the main star, and then it's like, as you get bigger, like I don't think it's any shame to say that you kind of get more power to bring in different people. But I think Nance was a wonderful, and I believe is he still with us? He was a great.
Don't think he is. No.
Is a great character actor anyway, and I think kind of the fact that he fell into that role, it kind of fits him very well, because like in Twin Peaks he's great in that character, but he's not a main character. He's in the right place though, you always feel like, and I love how Lynch really uses him well. Just a couple more from Razorhead. So was this Carl's first ever role? Razorhead's thing? Was it right?
It may well have been. I mean, it was very, very early. I would have to check it, but certainly the first one. I think anyone, that he came to prominence. Yeah.
And to be fair, the new movies completely waste the Baron and the Emperor. Can we just talk about the flying kind of cart of things? Like it the first thing that came to my mind was what's the Pixar film when they're in the future? WALL-E, and they're kind of floating around on those like things.
Yeah.
Oh god, now if you're going to ask me what one thing Lynch did which improved on the wonderful work of Mr. Villeneuve, here we are. It's just a guy just flying above the screen.
Yeah,
and it's fantastic. I could not be happier with that particular choice of how they've staged that. It's just
I enjoyed that. I enjoyed some of that. I know they were working within the effects budget they had at the time, but like the bit where he learns to ride the worm, and it's just got this shot where he sort of digs his thing in, and then his body just rises up the screen, and it's clearly they've just cut out that element and moved it up through the screen. It looks so unnatural, but yeah. And one thing that I think's a very Lynch thing that they don't do in the new films is that they reveal that it's I forget all the names of the different clans and whatnot, but basically it's the Navigators Guild, I think is the name, that are behind the whole nefarious plot. And they leave that out of the new films because the Navigators Guild are like these weird things in a jar. Whereas you can imagine David Lynch going, no, I want the Navigators Guild in there. Give me the weird thing in a jar. Let's have that. In fact, let's put it in the first scene. Never mind.
And I'd also throw in, you mentioned the worm there. That was one thing which I found, I don't know, maybe it's just my weird adult brain, but the first thing I thought, because they did this shot where the worm had a closed mouth and it looked rather phallic. Like it's just, and we know Lynch is one to misspell with text and subtext, and sexuality is definitely something which he explores and kind of used in it. So there's a lot of symbolism as well. And then the end opens up and it perhaps looks more lady part-esque. And I just thought it was really interesting. Like maybe I've really thought this. But is this something which people talk about? Is it because I'm like, again, I've not really talked about these films. Like,
I mean, I'm not entrenched in the Dune subculture, but I do recall when they brought out them Dune popcorn buckets the other year that it looked yonic, I think is the word that you're searching for.
The
which,
Clucket buckets, I believe they.
Yes.
It rhymes with Clucket. I don't remember.
So yes, I think that's a fair point that you make there, and I think that's always going to be a risk you're going to run when you're dealing with enormous worms. But I imagine it's one that David Lynch probably had a bit of fun with, so I'm sure it's intentional.
When I was running with enormous worms, I just consulted the doctor. They gave me a couple of tablets. It went away straight away. So just some advice if anyone's dealing with that. Yeah, again, just jumping all over the map on this because, like, I mean, as if going through it chronologically is going to make it any more sensible. Like that's the fun of Lynch. It's just you can go about it. Like it depends on the film, I guess. But I feel like this is one you can jump about. It was interesting the way they did it with his sister as well. So it's kind of foretold that she was going to be this kind of figure, that she would be the seer, essentially. Whereas I believe, if I remember correctly, they handle it slightly different. In the wasn't it in the Villeneuve ones that they discovered she had that ability? Or
in the new ones, she isn't born by the end of the film, which is a departure from the book. But you get this kind of flash forward, and well, one of his visions, and it's Anya Taylor-Joy, and they tried to keep the cameo very, very secret, but then she was at the premiere, and everyone went, ah. So yeah, they kind of fumbled that at the last minute. But yes, whereas in this one, David Lynch is like, oh, you mean I can have a weird kid in it? Here we go. Yeah, let's have weird kid.
And that kid was in a few bits as well, wasn't she? She looked very familiar. I meant to look it up, but I completely forgot until now.
I am not sure off the top of my head.
A
We'll go with yes.
Razorhead, I'm sorry, I don't mean to abuse your goodwill, Razorhead, but if you fancied looking up or sharing, if you know that she was in some others, that'd be great. I thought Lynch's Sandworm looked great for the time. I really enjoyed it. Very, also very Beetlejuice kind of. I believe kind of there was a similar kind of style. I also think they look close to the way Herbert described them rather than Denise sandworms. Yeah. Yes, but Razorhead, I want to know from you, as someone who I'm guessing by the name of your handle is well versed in the community. I know you are because you're on the Reddit and everything. But is there this thing about looking like both a willy and vagina? Just curious. I don't know if that's a topic of conversation, if it's just my weird brain. I kind of want someone else to have had, someone's got to have had, at least a film student at some point has to have had that conversation.
Oh, I'm sure someone will have written a dissertation on it. I'm sure.
There is a, just make me feel better about my thought process, please. But anyway. Oh, I don't know. Oh yeah, the fear box as well. Like that's a very iconic scene. And like I couldn't have told you. I don't think there's any other scene I could really point to in this film before watching it, from kind of like the many times, as I say, I walked past my brothers watching it, or the times it was played at the time, because it was played a lot on TV. But that scene I remembered. I always remembered the fear box, and like, you know, that's just such a memorable idea. I love that. Yeah.
And that's like David Lynch getting to stretch his horror muscles with that. I agree. I think that is a really memorable scene in this film, and it's one of them that, again, when you look at the more recent films, it's very, very similar how it's done. And so that's one of two things. It's either the new films have taken inspiration from this one, or the scene in the book is so well described. Like I often think about when you look at Gollum in Lord of the Rings, he appears more or less the same in just about every form of media, from the films to the cartoon to the books to drawings to action figure, everything. And that to me just speaks to, well, Tolkien evoked that character so well that everyone's take on it is there or thereabouts. And, you know, so I think when you see echoes in these films, it could go either way. It's either two different artists have read something in a book and it's that vivid that it's interpreted that way, or they've bled into each other. And I'm sure it's probably a bit of both, to be honest.
And that's a really good note. I do like that. Yeah, there are certain scenes which it's so hard to do it a different way from in the book. Otherwise, people are going to be disappointed. Mind you, I kind of think after you've done a few versions, I think because you've only had two versions, like it's really interesting where there's been so many versions, someone's got to do it differently. And then it's kind of always interesting. They've drunk from the poison chalice, and I think they deserve at least bravery points for that when they do. But it's like,
I suppose with Dune, we're not quite at the stage of like watching Batman's parents get shot in the alley yet, you know.
Exactly, yeah. It's but it's another note from Razorhead before I go into another point. But Razorhead, I mean, not that I know of how. I think he's talking about something you said. I don't think he can be talking about.
No, well, see, there you go. At least you've got a little subreddit community that you can start yourself if no one else is into that. Maybe you'll find other people who feel the same way. And
I'm just saying, I don't care if this is years from now and someone discovers this video. Just comment. Just make me feel better if you had that thought. And anyway, I'm going to kind of wrap up so we can go on to the other one, because we are a bit against the clock.
Oh yeah.
So one thing I wanted to kind of just finally talk about is, I find the one takeaway, the one thing that I was struck by in the both versions, is that whole idea of someone not being from a place but belonging to there, and kind of like find their home there, and it almost feels like destiny. They're always meant to be there. I'm certainly not talking about Jack and Lost. That was bullshit the way they did that. But anyway, that's another story. If anyone knows the scene I'm talking about, yeah. Oh, he had this tattoo. It was like, oh, you're not from there.
Oh, don't start about the
From-
Jack's tattoo
Anyway.
episode. That's one of the worst things.
Anyway, that's the worst version. But yeah, it just always makes me kind of think about my parents, weirdly enough, because they, my mom's from Ireland, my dad is from Chima, originally grew up in Poole, but they both made. They met in Jersey and they made their home here in Romsey in Hampshire, where I am now, in this very house. And it's kind of, I always find that such a fascinating idea. As someone who is, well, I mean, I've got as far as Southampton, then I moved back to Romsey, and we're talking about 10 miles. So, like, as someone who's kind of a bit more of a homebody, I guess, and likes his kind of creature habit, I guess, I love traveling, but I love coming home. I just always love that idea, and I think, kind of as you alluded to about the second book, I think that side of it's kind of rushed in this, which is a shame, because I think that is such a powerful theme, I'm guessing, from the book as well, and it was really well played with the time they had to play with in Villeneuve's version. Yeah, sorry, thoughts on that? It's just that's my one takeaway from Dune. Is like, it's about one man's journey to be from who he thought he was to who he actually is, and I guess maybe that kind of chimes with my recent experiences of finding out about how my brain works and how it kind of works differently because I'm neurodivergent.
Maybe so, yeah. I mean,
it's a journey from who I thought I was to who I realized I was underneath all that kind of thing.
See, I think it's much more. I think there is elements of that, but I think it's much more about sort of the manipulation of that idea. Because does he actually belong there, or is it that the Bene Gesserit want him to think he belongs there so that he'll fulfill their prophecy? And is it that the Fremen want him to be the whatever it is? I can't remember the name, but there was that meme, wasn't there?
Yeah.
But you know, is it that they want him to be that, and is he actually that, or is he just leaning into it because he wants those people for his own ends? And that's what I find really interesting about the character and about the world, is that it's playing with these ideas of destiny and religion, and what happens when you use that to manipulate people, when you use it to manipulate the narrative that you want to tell, and who is it that's telling that story. So that's the stuff that I find really interesting, and I think a lot of that in this version is sacrificed because of the relatively brief runtime, and that they wanted it to be more of a blockbuster. And so I feel like this is kind of a noble failure. I would quite like to see the David Lynch, whether's, I think it runs to 3 hours. I think there's a fan edit where people have put
I do want to see
put deleted scenes back in, but Lynch himself never agreed to do a director's cut because he was like, nah, you know, it wasn't my sort of thing. So yeah.
Put a pin in that. I think we can maybe find that for a maybe a fest of some description later. Maybe
it's out there. It's out there. There are versions
we can explore in a later date. But yeah, very quickly, Eraserhead's just put religion and prophecy are used more as manipulation tool rather than the truth. Spice
Diver edit. There we go. We know what to look for now.
Just quickly, yeah. So I found that really interesting. Maybe it's because the way I took it was because I saw some of that. The way it kind of seemed to me was like it's like everyone wanted him to be this thing for their own ends, and to begin with, he was going in selfishly, and especially in the original one. I just read too much into it, but I thought that it was like Chalamet's version of the character, and in this version to a less degree because again it was rushed. Over time, kind of like realized the weight of what he was doing. It's like, it's not, you can't just choose this for no reason. It's like, if you're going to accept
I think there's definitely
you have to you know, really want it, really own it, and really be that thing, not just I'll say I'm that and do the job, because
I
that's why he
think
like when it
there's
took the stuff and his eyes turned blue. I felt that was him really realizing you got to walk the walk and talk the talk.
Yeah, no, I think there's definitely elements of that, and you may well be right, but I don't trust that Paul Atreides, and until I've read the rest of the books or seen any subsequent films, I'm reserving judgment on him.
You see,
Kyle MacLachlan's version, I think we can say yes. I think you bang on the money with MacLachlan's version, since this is the only story we will get of him. But
I was going to say,
Chalamet's, I'm not convinced.
with any of these Lynchian kind of things, if there's a follow-up a product of any description of any version, and I haven't seen it, I'm only basing it on what I've seen. So like if there's the evidence to come, yeah, obviously it's not true based on that, but it's like in this interpretation, it just seemed really interesting. There was a feeling of that for me. Okay, we're going to move on in just a second to Blue Velvet right after this. I just had a little transition thing I want to play with it. Okay, so we're on to Blue Velvet now. This one, oh man, this was really fascinating from the beginning to me.
Now we're talking. Now,
I mean, right as we
David
go.
Lynch coverage starts here properly. Here we go.
So I found this really fascinating. That it was like it just so much felt like a version of the Twin Peaks town, Twin Peaks. Like it was a logging town. You had the teenagers, you had the quirky, the elder characters who all kind of had a little quirk to them. I know it's not quirk blindness. Like I want to really point this out because I might refer to it because I feel like in some ways it might be used to have someone who's different in some way in there. Like Lynch loves people who are different in some way, to like have every character be different. And if they've got a characteristic like blindness, dwarfism, giantism, whatever the correct term is, you know, if there is something, it's not like he's using it to go, hey, look at the strange person, but it's a way of creating a difference between your characters, and then you can highlight it. I think that's something he uses, and I think he uses it here, and that's very much in Twin Peaks. You've got all the different kind of different ways of being a person kind of in Twin Peaks, and different eccentricities and different kind of like abilities and disabilities and all sorts. And I find that just fascinating. And it's kind of really weird in this version, like in this film. I almost said this version of Twin Peaks, obviously not Twin Peaks, but it's really weird in this kind of film to see MacLachlan being the teenage character, kind of like Twin Peaks. Again, I felt like it might be him, but it felt like a bit older than the character he's playing. And him, like, there is something just so staid about him. I think he does enough that, yeah, of course his characters are all different. Of course they provide something different. Of course this character is a much less staid in the way he acts than Coop. But in the performance, it's very staid. And that's really interesting, where you've got kind of such a character who's kind of, I mean, seeing two women like, and that never seems to like bite him in the ass much. Like it reminded me of Good Night, Sweetheart. You got time traveling bigamist, and that just doesn't seem to be a problem for a tea time sitcom. This film, Laura Dern very quickly, like they're going out, they're not going out. They have like, you know, they obviously like each other, but she's with someone. He then has this kind of affair. She gets annoyed with him, but she's also like cheating, and both kind of like male partners then turn on him. Really kind of interesting stuff, but yeah, I forget where I was going with that last bit, but it all fascinated me, and it's really weird to have that. And it's like, even though this is so unsupernatural, for then it to mirror Twin Peaks so much in an every-worldly way, and then in something which is so this worldly, to then have also, and I will hand it to you in a second, I swear, to have like shots like someone falls to the ground and then you go to some ants like close up. Like it's such an interesting shot, and it doesn't need to be there, but I'm so glad it is, and it's great, and it's so Lynchian to do that. Your thoughts going in?
Yeah, I agree with you on the Twin Peaks parallels, and I think what we're starting to get now is one of the things that Lynch seemed to revisit again and again throughout his career, which is this idea of what's the real America like, or Americana. And I think to a large extent, this film is a deconstruction of that. And I think Twin Peaks is also, to an extent. I think Twin Peaks is doing it in a slightly different way. But I first came across this film during university when we looked at it during film studies. And one of the things we looked at was psychoanalysis in cinema. And so I've always approached this film through that lens. And what we focused on was Lacan's idea about the worlds of the real and the worlds of the subjective, which, if anyone is an expert on Lacan out there, I apologize if I butcher this, but what effectively he was arguing is that the majority of our existence is spent within what he called the subjective world. So we create narratives for ourselves, we create feelings, emotions, ways of articulating the world around us that feel comfortable. And he described the real world as the world of the abject, which you only really see the real world usually in times of great trauma or great grief, when you're unable to do all these things that you have to do to process the real world, to make it into this safe, subjective world. And I think that is what Lynch is doing with this film, is presenting the world of the subjective, which is where we start the film, which is the Americana, the white picket fences, the good-looking American boy and the blonde-haired gal, and the romance and all of this stuff. And that's what he's projecting and showing you. This is the subjective world. But then, like you mentioned, that shot of the worms, what actually happens is the camera moves down, and it moves down through the grass, down to the worms, and you see what's lying beneath it. You said worms.
I said ants.
Oh, ants. Sorry, ants.
Did I say worms?
I've got. No, you said ants. Sorry, that's me. I've got worms on the brain from.
I was going to say I could just picture them because it was so close. I was like,
It's you talking about worms and willies and stuff.
Hey, if it was worms, I would have said that you put a dick in there,
Anyway, so it moves down and we see the ants, and that symbolically is the film showing you, okay, we're moving away from the world of the subjective into the world of the real. And then the world of the real that we see is the more horrifying world. It's the one where Frank Booth is, where all these crimes are taking place, where all this horrific stuff is taking place. And towards the end of the film, there's almost a reverse of that shot, and we come back up out of it, and we get that over-the-top sort of happy ending. The robins will come and they will bring love. And I think Lynch is having a bit of fun with that idea of showing you, there's this heightened, cheesy world, which is the world we all want to live in, which is the nice world of the subjective. But he's saying, look under the surface of it and you will find this terrifying world of crime and murder and abuse and all the rest of it.
I mean, that's brilliant. We'll get to your comments in a second, Eraserhead. I do want to bring those in, but I just want to discuss a couple of things that you mentioned there. So, firstly, I think the ants clearly represent boobs, but we'll get into that another time.
Of course, yeah.
So, yeah. But yeah, for me, it was really like what you were saying about the kind of a real world and the imagined world and all this from that theory. It reminded me, actually, I studied counseling, and I studied person-centered counseling. The sort of father of person-centered counseling was a guy called Carl Rogers. He didn't want to call it Rogerian counseling because he wanted people to add to it and expand the world. But one of the lectures he gave, and he wrote this into a book, was or at least a chapter in one of his books, was called "Do We Need a Reality?" So it was all about that. It was all about the idea that Like once the moment's gone, all you've got is the viewpoints. Like, yeah, you can record it on camera, but even then, that's subjective. You've got editing, or if it's live, you've got choice of what you chose to film, of what you include, what you don't. And some person gets that moment, another person can get something completely different, but it doesn't necessarily make one of them more true than the other. So I think that's kind of really interesting, and I think that's definitely present in Lynch's work. And something else I was thinking about was also that when I was watching this was that because it did make me think of Twin Peaks through styles so much and through kind of the town, which, by the way, a good time to bring in a Razorhead's comment. When Lynch and Frost were creating Twin Peaks, ABC told them they wanted something in the style of Blue Velvet. That's definitely apparent, although kind of interesting, the kind of little tweaks and differences they make, but so many things in here. There was even one shot where it kind of zoomed out from the picture of Laura Dern, very reminiscent of the picture used so often of Laura Palmer. And there were so many of those little nods. But I think that to Lynch, supernatural and the everyday, there is no delineation for it. Like, if he's telling a story, it's what he's saying with it is more important than the vessel of if it's reality or if it's fiction. That's something which this made me really kind of realize, because he sort of did so many things which he does here in Twin Peaks later, and that's very otherworldly. And it's like, in fact, when it has bits which don't include the otherworldly, you kind of like you miss it. Like, because
I think Twin Peaks, and this does go a bit sort of extra textual with some of the stuff he said, but Twin Peaks, he said that he felt we'd become desensitized to violence on television, and he cited sort of cop shows and things like that where you'd have a dead woman every week and people wouldn't care, and he wanted to make people care. And I think the reason he wanted to introduce supernatural elements into Twin Peaks, I think what he wanted to do was the same thing as what he's doing here, which is showing the difference between the world of the subjective and the world of the real. But with Twin Peaks, he felt that he couldn't do that without introducing another element. Like, because we'd become so desensitized to human violence on television, he felt he had to introduce supernatural elements to convey that. Whereas in this, the human violence is enough. Like when we bring Dennis Hopper's character on it, he's a representative of the real, and it's through his violence and his unhinged, which I think is a fantastic performance, by the way. But
it's amazing, and it just shows that man never went small with the performance. But it's
no,
to his credit in his way of acting, I think.
But yeah, I think it's an unsettling performance because it feels too real. It's like you can't comprehend it. It's frightening because it's someone who is so clearly unhinged that it forces you as a viewer to think, well, how could you possibly deal with someone like that? There's no reasoning with him. There's no logic to him. It's just a very, very frightening character because they're so unpredictable. And so, I think the difference between Blue Velvet and Twin Peaks is that Blue Velvet grounds it all in the human side of it, but in order to snap people out of this sort of malaise with television violence, he had to take it to another level and introduce the supernatural to it. At least that's my take. But
no, I can see all that as well. But yeah, I mean, just to sort of tag up on what you were saying there, I thought it was really interesting the way Hopper's character, as you say, was a sort of unhinged, love-like character. He kind of like takes the oxygen out of the room in one way or another. Like, if you're friends with him, you could imagine that he's just like, he's the biggest presence, and he's got to always be the biggest presence, and that's who he is. And it's kind of interesting that they also showed that he's this charismatic leader or certainly a leader who kind of like has people following around. You've got the kind of like the people in this gang who are just kind of lackeys, and you've got Dean Stockwell's character here, who it's really interesting how I think Dean Stockwell's character knows that if he fucked around, he would find out. However, he's kind of a little dismissive of him at the same time. He's got some status. It's like, look, I'm
Yeah.
not going to piss you off and do what you want, but there is going to be beneath it something which probably you, like Hopper's character, won't pick up on, like is that he's kind of got contempt for him, but everyone else, like who isn't off their trolleys, will pick up on that and will know it's there. And it just very much reminded me of current world politics in some ways. I'll leave you all to figure out where, but I'll just say the Dean Stockwell character might or might not have been Canada and Justin Trudeau in this. But anyway, like there's other characters you can pick up, whoever you might choose they might be. Let's get to the very meat of it though, and this is the kind of I think at the heart of it, what I wanted to really explore about this is that what I and I messaged you this the other night. What I find really kind of interesting is that Lynch, I think he has this way of kind of exploring kind of these unsettling, gross, worst of humanity elements, but he also deals with some real feelings, even if we know they're not okay sometimes. So what I mean by that is, like, here he shows this scene where like there is this kind of feeling around kind of sexual coercion that's kind of sexy for men when the woman's doing it. Like there is that image, like, you know, you hear about these stories where kids at school, a teacher sleeps with them, and you will always hear from some group of men how, oh god, I wish that happened to me when I was, you know, that kind of thing.
Yes.
And I think to pretend that isn't a thing's disingenuous. And I'm not gonna lie, when you saw that first film, that first scene of coercion, there was some sexual thrill about it for a moment for me. I knew it wasn't okay. I'm not saying it's okay. I'm not encouraging that, but I will be honest, to have that feeling in a second, but knowing in context it's not okay, it's not right. But then when what Lynch does brilliantly is he'll do that. He'll make you question those thoughts and feelings you might have, and then he'll show it kind of like on the other foot. So you've got Hopper puts on the makeup, and it looks like he's going to molest him, like, and it just really highlights to you how gross that earlier scene is. And it's like it does make you confront those feelings which you might not be proud of. I don't know. I just find that really interesting. I think it's very honest.
Yeah, it is. And it's very honest in its portrayal of a young man, as you say. Like, we can watch it as observers and say, yes, he's being coerced by her. It's she's effectively trying to bring him into an abusive relationship, and you know, she herself is being abused by Frank Booth, but and then she kind of wants him to fill that role as well. It's almost like she can have the closeness without an element of the violence, but yes, and it does portray him as he enjoys that. It's like there's this older exotic woman who's seducing him, and even though he may not like everything she's doing, there's enough of him that enjoys that. And that does, like you say, tap into a young man's mindset. And yeah, I think the analogy you used there about the sort of teacher-student thing is very apt, because it's often an offhand, flippant thing that a lot of men will say, like, "Oh, I'd have loved it if my teacher had when I was that age." And yeah, it is. It's tapping into that. It's asking questions about it, and they're not questions that we're necessarily comfortable answering. But again, that sort of feeds into what I was talking about it the idea of presenting the abject, the real. It's things that we don't want to look at, so we have to build these barriers of the subjective to keep us away from facing that. And yeah, and this is another way in which he does that, is to force us to question what we're seeing and whether not only is he forcing us to question, are the characters getting excitement out of this that they shouldn't be, but are we also? And he does
Yeah.
that through violence as well. This is something like Tarantino does a lot, where he shows incredibly violent things and challenges you to go, yeah, I enjoyed that. And so I think Lynch is doing that here as well.
And I think the only real kind of like difference, and I don't know, I think maybe even I'm pointing this out to excuse myself somehow, but it's like I think a genuine difference I can say is that, like, it's the fancy of it, not the reality of it for me. So when it is a real case, it's like, man, that's going to screw that kid's life up. There's never, I never like read that and go, oh, when I was, it is different,
Yeah, it is.
And I think some people have more of a kind of like an unhealthy line with that than others, and it's kind of.
And that's the thing, Lynch is very aware of the medium in which he's working. He knows that this isn't real. This is a film. So effectively, this is a safe space for you to explore those thoughts, those ideas. Ultimately, Jeffrey is not a real person. He wasn't really abused. But if we're empathizing with the characters, we feel it does force us to feel bad about maybe enjoying it. In fact, we almost, another way that's sort of encapsulated is you've got that sequence where Jeffrey's hiding in the cupboard, and Isabella Rossellini's character is, Dennis Hopper comes in and he appears to sexually assault her. Well, he certainly sexually assaults her. This is often described as a rape scene, and it depends what you classify as rape, because I'm not saying what he does is not a sexual assault in any way, shape, or form.
Sorry, just I don't want to interrupt you. Just we've only got a few minutes left, so just beware of opening books. We don't have time to close. That's all.
No.
You can talk about anything on this, but just
yes. Well, no. The point I'm making is he doesn't remove his trousers at any point during this sequence, so there isn't any penetrative sex going on, but he acts it out as though there were. And Jeffrey's watching this, and I personally find that scene quite farcical, even though it's horrific. And I think you've got layer upon layer going on here. So you've got me as a viewer, I'm questioning myself, why am I finding this funny? Something absolutely horrific's happening. But then Dennis Hopper's character is meaning to effectively rape someone, but isn't in the strictest sense, even though what he's doing is still a sexual assault. But he's doing something performative. He's not actually doing the thing that he wants her to think he's doing. So who is he performing for? And then on top of this, you've got Jeffrey watching it, but neither of the other characters know that he's watching it. But he's still watching a performance, even though they don't know that they're performing for him. So there's just all these layer upon layer upon layer of interpretation of that sequence. And I find it just absolutely fascinating.
I mean, I'm just going to sort of put it out there. Why is it Willow decides, like, this is the moment where I really need to strike her, where we're having a really in-depth, serious conversation about, like, the anyway, just like timing Willow. It's like, do you think she was just going, it's like, just stop talking about the mucky stuff, Dad?
Maybe.
Anyway,
I mean, not the best film to not talk about the mucky stuff. Sorry, Willow.
Oh God, of course not. It's disgusting, but almost funny at the same time because of how absurd his performance and action. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I think there's definitely that stuff which Lynch is playing with. I'm just going to quickly, I'll leave your thoughts on that one because I think you've summed up perfectly. I'm just going to give my thoughts on a slight, like other bit on this. It's the bravery of it is Bissett, isn't it? Caroline Bissett.
Who's that? What?
The
The
actress,
actress.
the main actress.
Isabella.
The lead
You mean Isabella Rossellini?
Isabella Rossellini. Sorry, I was getting my names muddled. Isabella Rossellini. Just the sheer bravery of her performance, the kind of shape she's got, the fact that you do feel sympathy for him, for her. Sorry, the fact that she does a really great job of like, or you know, the film does a great job of like McLaughlin along the way. It's like the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I mean, part of them aren't so great intentions because he's obviously getting some excitement out of it, but then you feel like he's got this hero complex that he's trying to save her because he's been born into this world. He doesn't have the mechanism. He hasn't thought through how he's going to do that.
He doesn't. He doesn't. Sorry.
It's just he then sort of like starts doing things like, yeah, he will give her a little slap because like, oh, if he does that, then maybe he'll be able to get something because she'll keep him around long enough for him to figure out how to save her. And it's just like, it's going and thinking of the hero and having no idea about how to. It's sort of like by the end of it, it kind of lucks into everything working out. But he's got no part. And I sort of found it also fascinating. And yeah, sorry, I did want to, yeah. So, and her going out and like just being completely naked and just so vulnerable and so much in pain. And it's like, just for any actor to do that is tremendous. And then in the end, I think it's very purposeful that so we don't see what happens apart from in a bit of flashback. Like he just goes in and it's kind of solved. And it kind of really highlights that thing of like, he had no idea. He didn't really save her. He just swoops in and then sort of takes credit. And then all the people who surround him. Back to my point earlier about the gang. It's weird to see how once the charismatic leader's out of the way, those people sort of go, oh, you know, it's like they're, oh, we could just be good people. And like, that's actually quite nice where we're not like doing all that shit and not involved in that. But it's like, they're so out of it. They don't see it at the time. Quick final thoughts and then we'll kind of wrap up.
Yeah, I mean, what I found really interesting that you said there is like he's a hero, but he doesn't really have the mechanism. Again, I know I keep belaboring the point, but I think that again speaks to what I was saying about the subjective and the real. The reason he can't be the hero is because that kind of hero doesn't exist in the world of the real. It exists in the world of the subjective, the knight in shining armor, and that's what he wants to be. But when he's forced into the world of the real, such a thing does not exist, so he can't be that within that world. And then yes, at the end he comes out of it and we get the fairy tale happy ending, which is over the top, almost laughable, and I think it's intentionally almost laughable. It's this saccharine, oh, the robins are here, and I think again that's intentional to show you the back in this subjective world that's safe. All we've been to the world of the real, but we're out of it again, and this is a nice safe space where none of that can touch us. But the implication of the film is, well, it always can, because that's the real world. You can be safe in your world of the subjective, but that's always lurking there.
Very well put. Just very quickly, Razorhead, Jeffrey is by no means a villain, but we see darkness within him throughout the movie. Yeah, I mean, I would say, just summation my end. I just think he's like, it's almost like the way he kind of like, and also Laura Dern's character goes between kind of lovers, but he finds in this circumstance, again, he's in over his head. He's got involved in something he doesn't understand, but he's still kind of trying to vibe it like someone at that age does. It's like, it'll be work out. Like, it's okay. I can still be in love with Laura Dern. I can still, like, he even gets this little, like, even when she finds out, it's like, hey, look, but come on, understand, babe, I still love you. And she's fine with it. And it's like, and it's that kind of almost that imaginary world that younger people live in, like, because the reality.
Exactly, that's it. Because it's those sequences are not reflective of what the real world is like. They're almost a fairy tale version. And you get that sequence where Isabella Rossellini turns up at Laura Dern's house, and it's almost like the two worlds colliding. And Jeffrey's in the middle and doesn't know what to do, because it's this head-on collision of these two worlds, and that shouldn't happen. I mean, we could spend hours talking about it. I know we don't have the time, but can I just very quickly, two quick things that we've talked about during this. One, you talked about the subjectivity of memory. We're going to come back to that in future episodes. And also, Laura Dern is blonde and Isabella Rossellini is a brunette. And I'm just going to leave that there, because that's something we're going to come back to again and again.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to cut it because I've got to sort out something. So we're playing D&D in a bit, and I've got to set up my character sheet still. So I'm going to whack a pizza in the oven before we start on that. But that's something you don't need to know, dear viewers, or Razorhead and everyone else out there. Thank you very much for joining us, Razorhead. What a wonderful time talking about David Lynch films once again with Mr. Jim King.
Thank you.
And until next time, I've been Dr. Squee. That was my show. And until we meet again, make sure you keep the Lynch mob ready. I want to sign off for this, but we'll figure it out later. Anyway, be kind to each other. Bye.